Hey everyone, Anark here. The people who are watching this on the Cooperation Tulsa YouTube, this is the first, uh, sorry for the cat. This is the first session of the Organizer Education Reading Group for Cooperation Tulsa, at least the first that we are live streaming. We are going to be beginning at the beginning of Volume 1 of Full Spectrum Resistance. This is a book that we have been reading in our Organizer Education Reading Group beforehand, and we have found it extremely informative. Eric McBay, Eric McBay. Sorry, I used to mess his name up when I made videos about him, but he has written an extremely valuable guide for organizers. He covers all kinds of things: strategy, tactics, both above ground and below ground aspects of organizing. It is extremely, extremely important. So if you are joining us on either YouTube, we appreciate you being here. The part of the reason why that we are doing it on both YouTubes is in hopes that some of you who follow the Anark YouTube channel will go over to the Cooperation Tulsa YouTube channel and click subscribe. These live streams will be dual streaming, so you can tune in from either. That is assuming that I've got this set up correctly. For those who are already showing up, I appreciate it. I got a little bit of a rough start there, but I eventually pulled it out of the bag. The reading group won't be starting here for at least a few more minutes. I wanted to get started early just to make sure that I had everything set up correctly. So I appreciate everybody who's already shown up. So if you would like to join the reading group, if you'd like to be one of the readers, if you'd like to be in the chat where we will be doing the discussions, just go over to the Cooperation Tulsa Open Collective and become a recurring donor for any amount. So, that could be $2, $5, $10, $20, whatever amount that you can spare every month will get you access to being in the reading group. That is to say, oh my fucking God. Wow.
Really bad. That was a really bad start there. I had no audio hooked up. I should probably just try this all over again, honestly. But I'm not going to. For everybody who showed up, this is the Cooperation Tulsa Organizer Education Reading Group. This is our first session. We are essentially dual streaming to the Anark YouTube channel and to the Cooperation Tulsa YouTube channel. We are going to be reading Eric McBay's Full Spectrum Resistance, Volume 1. The Organizer Education Group, which is associated with Cooperation Tulsa, meets every other Monday at 7:30 Central Standard Time. And we have actually already read Volume 1 of Full Spectrum Resistance, but we are now reading we moved on to reading Volume 2 of Full Spectrum Resistance. However, we realized partway through that we wanted this to be a more holistic resource. We wanted this to be something that people could always come back to. We wanted these recordings to be available to people who just wanted to learn about this book and really kind of just wanted an audiobook recording of it. Because in the organizer education groups, what we do is we actually just read it out loud, paragraph by paragraph. We switch off between readers. If you want to be one of the readers and you want to be in the discussion group, all you have to do is go over to Cooperation Tulsa's Open Collective and become a recurring donor for any amount that you can spare. And we will give you access to the Jitsi meeting room where we will be having these ongoing discussions and reading out loud. But if you don't want to do that, you can still have access to this information simply by listening to the live streams. So the live streams we're hoping will just kind of be an asset. And for those who want to be part of the process, then you can become a recurring donor over on the Cooperation Tulsa Open Collective. Yeah, I didn't even have my main mic hooked up for the entire beginning of the stream. I did phenomenal. This is why I got started earlier, just to be absolutely sure that everything was okay. And it wasn't. I inevitably screwed up that very first time there, but here we are. We're doing good now. So yeah, I am trying to get a few things set up here. Give me just a moment. There we go. All right. Okay, well, there was audio. Okay, so it wasn't too bad. I heard the very first part there. Somebody's joined the Jitsi chat. So we have our first reader who's joined us today. There we go. Oh, we got a couple people in here already. So yeah, it's a mixture of members of Cooperation Tulsa, but also people who just want to join, who are maybe not members of Cooperation Tulsa. It is open to the public. But once again, if you want to become one of the readers and you want to be in the Jitsi chat where we are having the discussion about the work, just become a recurring donor to the Cooperation Tulsa Open Collective, which should be down in the description if you are watching from the Cooperation Tulsa channel. So what's up, Theo? What's going on, Eric? These will be happening every other Monday on. I can hear you. Yeah, I have to manage which of these is muted and which of them is not. So like I can unmute myself here in the Jitsi. I don't know if this is better or worse for you. Yes. Did you not hear what I was saying there? Can y'all hear the Jitsi chat right now? Can you give me feedback here in the live stream chat, everyone? This is why I opened it up early, because I was like, I just have to get all this troubleshooting done. I knew that it could definitely turn out to be a problem. Okay, they cannot hear you at the moment. So see if we can fix that. Give me a testing. Could people hear Theo? Well, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you just fine, but I don't know if they can. So we'll find out here in a second. Still not, apparently. Okay, so somehow I've got to fix it so that they can hear this chat here. Okay, let's see. Window capture. Okay, maybe this will work. Let's see. Copy and paste. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out right now. Gotta love everybody being here for all of the troubleshooting on the very first one, but hopefully we won't ever have to do it again after this. Let's see, present or invite. Share screen. Okay, this might work. All right. Let's get another testing now. Oh, wait, here we go. I think this will work. Give me a sec here. Give me just a second. Yeah, this is I'm glad that I thought to do this, open this up early, because I'm still pretty confused about how to get this set up. Okay, so then that might have been it right there.
Okay, you want more testing? Gonna just keep talking and saying nonsense and see if YouTube catches up. Yep. No, I hear it. I can hear it through the YouTube stream. Oh. We did it. On the YouTube stream. It's not showing up here.
I don't have myself on the stage. How do I even set this damn thing up? I'm so confused. It's possible that I'm not even doing it right. Like, this may not even be the best way to go. We'll find out, I suppose. Yeah, that makes sense. Now I've got myself over here presenting. So let's see. It might be best. Let's see. How could I do this? Yeah, the problem is that I have to have both me and this on the screen at the same time, I think. This is very confusing. I think they could hear me now. But I think, right, exactly. But now we can't do it both at the same time or something. How do we do this? How do we get this set up? If I go remove and then add. Now I bet they can hear both of us. Say something, Theo.
Something Theo.
Something Theo. There it is. So did you hear yourself there?
Yeah, I hear it. Yeah, I hear it now.
Phenomenal.
There's like a 3 to 5 second delay, but I can hear me. It's very distracting.
Yeah, now I have to figure out how to get the book on screen at the same time.
Well, the same way that you normally do. So if you share, so the thing is, I can see the screen with all of our tabs with our names.
Yeah.
And so the way that you share screen normally, if you
Right.
do that, it will share it to the YouTube stream as well.
Yes, I think that is exactly how I'm going to have to do it. Let's see here. All right. Boom, got that up on screen. Now share over here. This is just hilarious. This is ridiculous. Boom. Okay. Oh, okay. See, now I can see that they're not seeing the whole thing. Oh, then I have to go to see what I'm sharing. There, I bet we got it now. I think we finally got it. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. This is high quality right here. This is super high quality.
All right. Well, testing my audio with this to see. Just hear you. Wait. No, I can hear me now. Okay. I think we got it going. We got it. We're in business.
We did it.
Let's fucking go.
Wow. This right here, this is masterful work that we figured out. Oh, and this is good too. Ooh, see, it's even bigger on the screen. It's like we've just got this all together. Sam was saying that I need some kind of producer, but I'm pretty sure that I'm a master at this now. So I think we're good. We don't need producers. We just need StreamYard, apparently.
Look, if somebody's willing to do it for free, just take the help.
Speaking through a potato, does my audio sound bad right now?
No, it sounds fine, but the fact that it's going through two different things, so it's also going, you may have two mics going at once.
That is possible. That is possible indeed. Okay. Well, it is true, of course, that it's going through two different places, but let's see about this one. The mic is good. We're good. And then over here, oh, we got OBS. That's another place where there's a mic. Oh, also set to the right thing. We should be good. We should be good. What does everybody else think? Or can you hear my mic?
Well, the thing is that, like, you're clear enough that we can understand, and if it's working, let's just fucking do it.
I would have to agree. Okay.
Like, so I'm willing to sacrifice like quality audio for effective.
Let's see if I. Okay. I got an. Oh, if I mute my mic. Okay. Yeah, I'm still trying to think through all the logistics of this right now. Okay, so people are saying it sounds good now. It's possible that the person that made that comment was listening through the beginning of the stream where it sounded really bad. Okay, so the way we do this, and I think most people who are in the chat are familiar, is we just count off, and that gives us our order of readers. So we have our first 3 readers. I don't know if anybody else in the chat wants to read. Oh, we got a number 4. All right. So let's start looking at the book here. Yeah, it looks like it has 6 chapters. I found all of these to be very insightful in our previous read through. We had lots of really good conversations. I suspect we'll probably have a lot of good conversations this time around as well. And I think it will hopefully get more people to attend because they will be able to consume the older live streams in order to catch up. And yeah, so the first chapter is called Why We Fight. And I'll just bring us to it, or I guess I could click the heading here. So, chapter 1, Why We Fight. And it has 2 quotes at the top here. The first one is, I know the one thing we did right was the day we started to fight. Keep your eyes on the prize, a civil rights anthem. And then the second one is, we are never assured of justice without a fight.
Daniel, let me interrupt you.
What's up?
This needs to be like way bigger.
I can't make it any
Instead of
bigger.
having
I could do
the
this.
full page on the screen. So yes, perfect. Because I'm
Is that
looking on
better?
both my laptop and on the YouTube.
Is this legible?
It is, yeah. It's both on legible on my laptop and legible on the YouTube stream on my phone. I can see that now. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, cool. So then the second quote is, we are never assured of justice without a fight. And that one's Angela Davis. So that begins, I wrote this book because we are losing. The global exploitation of the poor is accelerating even as the richer grow wealthier than at any point in history. The fertile planet that keeps us all alive is being poisoned, baked, and stripped bare. Remaining indigenous and traditional people continue to be attacked and pushed off their lands so that the rich can exploit resources that will be exhausted in a few decades anyway. We are losing, and we need to learn how to win fast. I've been a social and ecological justice activist for 2 decades. In that time, I've worked on waste reduction and recycling projects, organized with anti-poverty community groups, and marched or sat in jail at summit protests. I've helped start a community garden and organic farming operations. I've written 4 books and given speeches to both academics and angry crowds. I've been a union organizer and a farm organizer. I've worked with militant conservation groups using direct confrontation and civil disobedience. I've developed a broad perspective on political action that comes from using many different tactics in many different campaigns. But the truth is that in almost every campaign I've worked on in my life, we have lost ground. In ecological campaigns like forest defense, that's been literally true. In anti-poverty campaigns, it's reflected in the ever-growing gap between rich and poor. This is not only my experience, but the experience of many activists working on many different issues. In areas where I do feel like progress has been made, say queer rights, there's a constant threat of backlash and backsliding. The gains we have won rest on a temporary and unstable foundation. We cannot expect to win long-term human rights from a society that is based on flagrant ecological unsustainability. If we want to reverse this tide of losses, we must speak honestly to each other about the situation we are in and about its severity. We must speak about why we've been losing and what that means for the future. This book is about what makes for effective action. It's about how to organize effective resistance movements. If we want to make social change and defend a habitable biosphere, we must unflinchingly examine those tendencies, especially those on the left, that have made us ineffective. I will dissect some of these pernicious predispositions in the pages to come. Some of these barriers to action are misconceptions about how power works in society. The left in general has been naive about the effectiveness of moral suasion. Too many people have clung to the faith in government that quote-unquote good citizens are supposed to have. We often work under the assumption that those in power will be convinced to stop their atrocities if we offer them a good example or a well-reasoned argument. Next.
Historically, this is nearly unheard of. The unfortunate reality is that most people in power, whether in political office or a corporate boardroom, benefit greatly from their status and have been trained not to question the power structures that put them there. Further, when we try to make social change, we rarely deal with thinking and compassionate individuals who can be persuaded by moral example. We deal with large, abstract social machines, corporations, and corporate structured governments. You can't persuade a machine. In the social machine of the profitable corporation, the anomalously compassionate individual is merely a defective component to be replaced by the bosses or shareholders. We have failed to think and act strategically. We've based so many of our campaigns on the idea that those in power will stop exploiting people and destroying the planet if only they can be educated out of a few minor mistakes. This is a comforting myth for those who might otherwise feel powerless. But it is a myth we cannot afford to cling to any longer. By allowing those in power to determine the agenda and the timetable for change, we have given up the initiative and we have failed to develop appropriate strategy ourselves. We need resistance movements, and if we want to become effective at combating runaway climate change and countless other injustices, thinking people on the left must stop acting like the loyal opposition and start acting like a real resistance force. We have to learn from the strategies and resistance movements of the past. I began my activist career as a young liberal environmentalist. I was the founding president of my environmental club in my environment club in elementary school. I gave speeches about saving the whales. I wrote and acted in a play about the dangers of environmental destruction, in which a selfish CEO was sent to the future to face the consequences of his acts. Our group set up composters, sold reusable Tupperware lunch kits so that people could reduce their waste, and raise money to adopt acres of the Amazon rainforest. I knew these were small gestures, but as a young person, I believed that if we could just convince and educate enough people, we would turn things around. When I was in high school, our environmental club ran a bottle and can recycling program. There wasn't a proper municipal recycling program in place yet, so we had to sort and wash the bottles ourselves and arrange for their pickup. Other students, ignoring our polite signs and pleas to be neat, would dump half-full pop bottles and garbage into our clearly marked recycling bins. Friday night after school was the time to organize and wash the week's bottles and cans. We would hose off the bins as we picked out plastic straws and soggy napkins. The spray generated a fine aerosol mist, a dilute fog of high fructose corn syrup. I remember the way it stuck to my skin, how it beaded on my forearms like sugary dew. We didn't care. We did it for the planet. Next.
Late one spring, another environmental group I was part of organized a weekend conference for students. We had speakers on all sorts of subjects: water quality, solar power, boycotting Nestle, and the benefits of growing hemp. But the presentation I remember most clearly, the people I will never forget, was from a group from the Ojibwe, I don't think I've ever said that out loud, community of Grassy Narrows. Oh my goodness, please forgive me. I will mangle this if I try. I am but an English speaker.
Are you actually going to try? You do not have to try. That is
no, that's why I was saying I apologize for not trying, because I know I'm going to butcher it. So I'm just going to move on. They were, by rather loose Northern Ontario standards, our neighbors, although they have driven for 10 hours to come to our conference. The Grassy Narrows representatives were of many different ages. The younger people went swimming with us in chilly little lakes. The older people were their speakers. They told us the story of their community and how it had been poisoned. Like most of Northern Ontario, the land around Grassy Narrows had been forest since the last ice age. Industrial activity, especially logging and the associated pulp and paper mills, metastasized into the area after World War II. In the 1950s, Grassy Narrows territory was flooded by the government for hydroelectric dams, forcing people to relocate. In 1962, the Dryden Chemical Company opened a, chloralkali plant nearby. The chloralkali plant, the plant was built to produce sodium hydroxide and chlorine for bleaching paper. This process is energy intensive, hence the hydroelectric dams But the factory also used large amounts of mercury for processing, and its effluent was dumped directly into the river system. If you look at a satellite photo of northwestern Ontario, you will see two things: forests and lakes. In the area around Grassy Narrows, there are thousands upon thousands of lakes and islands. There is hardly a place that can't be reached by canoe or paddle. So, for a very long time, the people of Grassy Narrows had relied on fish for food. When the reservations were imposed and settlers moved in, many Ojibwe used their excellent fishing skills as a source of income. They had to deal with the flooding of their land, with racism and relocation, with the horrors of the residential schools, but there were always fish. In the late 1960s, people in Grassy Narrows and neighboring White Dog First Nation started to get sick. Some of them had trouble speaking. Their hearing and vision began to fail. Walking became difficult. Their hands began to shake with tremors. People who had expertly tied the tiniest knots in fishing line for decades could barely tie their own shoelaces. Next.
It soon became clear that mercury was the culprit. Doctors brought in from Japan identified the illness as Minamata disease, a form of severe mercury poisoning named after the city in Japan where a similar mass poisoning had been caused by a different factory. In 1970, the government forbid the Dryden Chemical Company to release mercury into the water, though it continued to be released into the air. The chloralkali plant dumped at least 9,000 kilograms of mercury into the water between 1962 and 1970. The Dryden Chemical Company shut down in 1976, but the poisoning of the land was permanent. Contamination extended through the waterways more than 250 kilometers downstream over an enormous watershed. Cleanup was essentially impossible. There is simply no way to remove that much mercury from such a large area. It wasn't just humans and fish affected, of course. The many lakes and rivers were home to wild rice, waterfowl, amphibians, beavers, and other living creatures. Grassy Narrows won a financial settlement 16 years after the mercury poison was identified. The total amount was a mere $10,000 per person, meant to compensate them for the destruction of the land base and, in many cases, their own bodies. But very little of that paltry amount actually made it to members of the community. Bureaucratic red tape was an obstacle, so were band councils, supposedly representative bodies which have been imposed on First Nations by the Canadian government, but which are often dysfunctional and which many Indigenous people despise as tools of colonialism. Next.
I think it's back around to me. Yeah, I think it's back around to me. So in recent decades, contamination of the waterways has been worsened by clear cutting around Grassy Narrows, which caused major soil erosion. Mercury that had been immobilized in the soil was washed back into the waterways. One of the major struggles at Grassy Narrows became the fight to stop clear cutting on their lands. Clear cutting sanctioned and licensed by the state. The visitors from Grassy Narrows explained these things to us. They explained how the government continued to ignore their needs and continued to destroy their land and water, despite every reasonable and polite attempt by the Ojibwe to assert themselves. I don't remember them using the word racism or genocide, but both were clearly at work. The conference ended. The settler students went back to their homes and the indigenous to theirs. The next Friday came, and it was time to wash the recycling again. I remember the afternoon clearly. It was hot, which made the cloud of fructose spray even stickier. I pulled a used napkin out of a juice bottle for the umpteenth time, but instead of throwing it in the trash, I paused. I stared at its bleached white fibers, and I began to understand why our environmental activism wasn't working. That napkin helped me to grasp that environmental destruction wasn't really about lack of education. It wasn't about misunderstandings. It wasn't about technology that was more or less damaging. It was about power. Somewhere not far away was a group of indigenous people I had sat with, eaten with, spoken with, whose vast land base had been poisoned and clear-cut to produce napkins like the one I held in my hand. a napkin which was used for a few minutes or not at all, and then discarded without thought. The student who had thrown out this napkin didn't do so because they wanted to make a personal choice to destroy someone else's land base, and if they had individually refused to use that napkin, it would have made no visible difference. They did it because they were part of a system of power, a system in which they benefited from the destruction of someone else's land, and in which they had the privilege to be totally ignorant of that impact. They had power. Our indigenous friends, in contrast, had very little power in the economic and political systems of colonial Canada. Worse than that, the very existence of Canada was due to the fact that their lands, and the lands of many cultures, had been stolen. Most of Canada consists of land which was unceded, or for which treaties were coerced, or for which treaties were signed but not honored by settlers. Our environmental group had not gained very much traction with the student body. Before that conference, I'd believed that with enough hard work, public education, and awareness raising, we could convince people to give up some of their convenience and privilege to save the planet. But I began to grasp that perhaps we had it backward. It was their power and privilege that allowed them to ignore public education. They didn't care about environmental awareness because it was someone else's land they were destroying. They could always pretend that things were fine because they would never be the ones who had to suffer the consequences of their actions, at least not until it was too late. Next.
Later, I went for a walk in the woods to think things over. There was a long, narrow strip of forest near our school, graded with little paths. It stretched alongside 3 different schools: our high schools at one end, my elementary school in the middle, a university at the far end. I walked by a fenced-off little cemetery in the woods, long abandoned, which I had passed many times before. At the far end of the path were a few boarded-up old buildings. Near one, which looked like a chapel, was a plaque. I had never been close enough to read before. On inspection, it informed me that I was standing on the site of a former residential school, founded as a mission in 1832. At first, I believed the plaque referred to the little chapel, and then realized the plaque referred to the main 4-story building of the university. I had been in that building hundreds of times without ever realizing why it had been built. As I went back into the woods to walk home, I passed the cemetery again and felt a chill. I went in through a little gate for the first time and began to read the names and dates on the rough headstones. The birth and death dates were so close together. They were only children. The cemetery I had walked past so many times was full of children who had been taken from their families, from their culture, and who had died in the residential school. I fell to my knees with tears in my eyes. There was a reservation 20 minutes by car from where I lived. They knew all of the things I took so long to learn, but I had never been there, and I had never met anyone who lived there. It was a kind of de facto segregation. One of my teachers explained that South African officials visited Canada when they were setting up apartheid, so they could model it after the reservation system here. For a long time, I had believed that stopping the destruction of the planet was a matter of correcting misunderstandings about the planet and of choosing better technologies. But I was learning that Canadian culture, the existence of Canada, was built on a foundation of atrocity. Education alone could not correct a political arrangement that was so fundamentally rotten. I began to understand something about how power worked. And so I started to grasp a bit of radical politics. At the time, I didn't really understand the implications of this. I lacked an adequate grounding in the history of social change, and there weren't many other proto-radicals around to discuss it with. But I wanted to understand, to find those people, to make actual change, to resist. Next.
There's a difference between dissidence and resistance. A dissident believes that those in power are acting badly, that society is unjust, but a dissident doesn't materially try to stop those things. Their primary activity is believing and sharing their beliefs with others. Resistors put their beliefs into action. They work to disrupt or dismantle the social, economic, and political systems that cause injustice and exploitation. If we want to have a livable future, we need to move beyond dissidence to real resistance, and we must understand the kinds of tactics that resistance movements use to win. The mainstream left in Canada, the United States, and much of the industrialized world has allowed itself to be whittled down to two main tactics: electoral politics and ethical consumerism. If someone hands me a leaflet or emails me a call to action, I can be almost certain that it will tell me either to write my elected representative or to vote with my dollar by purchasing some supposedly moral product, or both. You could add a third main tactic, awareness raising, but the intention is usually to drive people to either change their vote or buying habits. It is no surprise that these are the tactics that remain. Government and capitalism are the two most powerful systems in society, and these tactics are intended to appeal to them. But these tactics also offer very little leverage, and for reasons I will discuss, I have rarely achieved gains alone. By limiting ourselves to these tactics, we ignore the vast repertoire of tactics available to us. We also doom ourselves to ineffectiveness, and being ineffective further undermines our ability to mobilize action and to recruit new activists. The truth, so difficult to accept for those of us raised in a tradition of the liberal left, is that good examples and cogent arguments alone have never stopped exploitation or upset entrenched systems of injustice. They have not done that in the past, and they will not do it now. What we need is to mobilize political force and to confront injustice directly. In other words, to fight. The idea of fighting back makes the liberal left deeply uncomfortable. This is because the liberal left identifies so closely with those in power and sees itself as part of those power structures, the loyal opposition. Those who break that loyalty lose the privileges that come with the position. The liberal left is also uncomfortable with fighting back because it has developed a mythology of social change that bears little resemblance to reality, but I'll come back to that. Like many grassroots activists, I have grown extremely frustrated with the timidity of liberals when it comes to confronting systems of oppression, not only because they should be fighting back, but because in fearfulness, they hold others back. Next.
A few years ago, I was part of a large grassroots campaign involving prisons and agriculture. It began when the federal government of Canada decided to shut down the 6 prison farms in the country. Those were the farms that operated on prisons, where prisoners produced food for their fellow prisoners, got experience, and worked with plants and animals. Everyone we spoke to on the inside told us that the prison farms were valuable for prisoners and that working on the farms, a sought-after position, helped them to cope with their circumstances. The prison farm program also paid for itself through the food produced. But the conservative government decided to shut the prison farms down as part of their tough-on-crime agenda. They wanted to scrap rehabilitation programs, criminalize more people for minor law breaking, lengthen sentences, and build larger super jails to accommodate all of the new prisoners this would create. Cramming huge numbers of people into tiny cells without any access to social programs would supposedly increase public safety. It quickly became clear that the conservative plan to shut down the prison farms had nothing to do with them being cost effective. Rather, they wanted to get rid of a program that was actually offering some benefit to inmates because they felt that prisoners did not deserve to work with plants and animals or to go outside. The prison farms, in other words, did not function as a source of punishment. Farm work was coddling the prisoners. Prisons are big business. The conservative prison plan meant that billions and billions of dollars would be spent on building new prisons, new security technology, and guard wages, along with the feeding and clothing additional inmates. This money would go to the corporations that make up the prison industrial complex, corporations that profit from human suffering and the destruction of human communities. Those companies would use their profits to lobby for even more criminalization. 2 of Canada's 6 prison farms are at Kingston, Ontario, the city nearest to me. One of them is on 800 acres of land in the middle of Kingston. It's been called the largest urban farm in North America. On its 4 sides, it is bordered by a sprawling factory, a commercial strip, a residential area, and a large network of sensitive wetlands. It was apparent that if the farm was closed, the next step would be for the government to take that land and build a super prison or simply sell it for development. Kingston has a strong local food movement thanks to the Progressive National Farmers Union and awareness of fossil fuel issues and climate change. So a lot of people understood that this farmland in the middle of the city was invaluable and could even keep people from going hungry in the future. After the planned closure was announced, a group of farmers and social justice activists tried to convince the government to reconsider. They spent a year trying to meet with government officials, organizing letter writing campaigns and petitions. They explained how valuable the prison farms were, both in terms of food security and as a form of rehabilitation, that they wanted to see people released from prison healed and not hardened. The government made no substantive response aside from the occasional insult. Frustrated at government stonewalling, some of the organizers decided it might be time to escalate to civil disobedience, and so they brought me into the core group. Civil disobedience, like all forms of resistance, is more effective when organized, and we required specific things to undertake civil disobedience. We needed to gather intelligence to identify points of leverage. The main site was a dairy farm with hundreds of cows and only one main access road. If they tried to move out cattle or equipment, we could blockade that road with our bodies. So we needed to be able to watch the farm for signs that equipment was being moved out. We needed to know who was available to show up and be arrested, and when on a 24-hour basis. We needed robust ways of mobilizing hundreds of people in minutes. For a blockade, we would need communications, lawyers, civil disobedience training for the participants, and so on. Next.
As we began to put that organization in place, we held a big event to mark the shift in the campaign. Author Margaret Atwood, among the most renowned figures on the Canadian left, joined us to speak. My job was to give a speech that would lay out the rationale for civil disobedience, along with a bit of its history, and explain how it fit into the campaign. In the minutes before the event began, several organizers and close supporters came up to me and said things like, make sure to emphasize that it is nonviolent civil disobedience, or make sure to say peaceful civil disobedience, and so on. If I had taken every bit of last-minute advice that was pressed upon me, I would have been speaking on passive, nonviolent, peaceful, democratic civil disobedience. Some organizers were nervous and wanted to make the shift in strategy seem as polite and non-threatening as possible. The venue, a big old limestone church, was soon completely full. 800 people were seated inside and more waiting outside. This was an enormous turnout for a political rally in a small city. A few others spoke before me, so when it was my turn on the stage, the crowd was already enthusiastic. But as soon as I mentioned the possibility of physically blockading trucks, the entire audience burst into applause. I hadn't yet explained how civil disobedience worked or why it was important. They already got it. Not because they were all familiar with that history, but because they understood that if powerful people are threatening your community, if they're bullying people, if they're ignoring you when their job is supposedly to listen, then, well, more polite requests aren't going to cut it. It wasn't some deep philosophical revelation. It was common sense. This was an important moment in my understanding of the campaign. The crowd's enthusiastic response came in part because they weren't as immersed in the liberal culture as some of the organizers. The willingness of everyone involved in the prison farm struggle to persist and escalate would eventually lead to a win after a 9-year campaign. In stories or movies about resistance, the leaders are always the brave ones, willing to take risks and giving their communities the courage to stand up for themselves and to fight back. That, after all, is what makes them leaders. But in real world organizing on the left, I've often seen the opposite. Those in leadership or organizing positions, afraid of alienating their sympathizers, or more importantly to some, their funders, often take the least confrontational position they can. They adopt the politics of the lowest common denominator, which means little danger of conflict and little risk of success. Again and again, I have seen liberal leaders who, instead of demonstrating initiative and bravery, actually hold back the people they are supposed to be leading. People of influence who discourage action and escalation in situations where it is clearly needed. Next.
Longtime civil disobedience organizer George Lakey tells the story of how he was invited by a progressive coalition in Washington, D.C. to design a set of nonviolent protests for them. He recounts, quote, "My first question to the group of national leaders was, where's the rebel energy in your coalition?" Silence followed. Finally, they began reciting the story of when various militant groups had left the coalition in disillusionment. In short, there was no rebel energy left. In that case, I said, "This will be a short meeting." He left. Our ideologies are supposed to be liberating and empowering. They are supposed to make us more capable of defending our communities and building new ones. But too often, they do the opposite. People grow encumbered by their ideas instead of empowered. In the modern left, those in leadership positions are often the most strongly enculturated with liberal ideas. They want to follow in the footsteps of people like Martin Luther King or Nelson Mandela, but they often do not know the details of the movements they want to emulate. Obviously, none of this is meant to impugn the people I organized with during the prison farm campaign, who were intelligent, serious, and dedicated. This is a comment on the culture of the left as a whole, which, though it often idolizes certain figures, has largely forgotten the specifics of those historic strategies and tactical choices. This cultural amnesia is an enormous loss, and it means that the left in general has lost its bearings. You can't tell where you're going unless you know where you've been. Furthermore, that history of struggle is profoundly useful for our modern day struggles. It is a library from which we can draw strategies and tactics. It is a deep well that can offer us inspiration and spiritual renewal. And it is an armory from which we can obtain the tools we need to defend human and ecological communities. The loss of this cultural legacy has not been an accident. It has not just been passively forgotten, but actively dismissed and buried by those on both the left and the right. Next.
When the people from Grassy Narrows visited our conference, they did so as part of a broader public awareness campaign. In the years since I met them, they dealt with worsening logging on their lands, with the continued and worsening legacy of mercury poisoning, and with the closure of fishing areas. The community has often been under boil water advisories because of contaminated water. This is not an uncommon problem. At this writing, there are 122 Indigenous communities in Canada which lack safe drinking water, many for well over a decade. In some, the water is simply too toxic to consume, even if it has been boiled, and bottled water must be shipped in. The government claims that it is too expensive to fix the water supply in sometimes remote areas. But how many millions and billions of dollars worth of lumber, oil, and other resources have been extracted from these remote areas without indigenous permission or compensation. Grassy Narrows spent decades trying to address worsening assaults on their community and land by raising public awareness and lobbying. They had meetings with the government, protests, petitions, letter writing, and legal challenges. They got no substantive response. So they turned to direct action. In 2002, they set up a blockade on the biggest logging road into their territory, and it worked. Joe Fobister, a trapper and community activist from Grassy Narrows, explains, quote, "I'm through with begging. My people have been begging for the last 130 years, since the treaty was signed, and it hasn't gotten them anything. And they'll continue to get nothing. I believe we have power. When we take our fight off the reserve boundary and take it out on the land, nobody, not the government, has intervened. So that's the message. They're afraid of us." End quote. Initially, logging companies, Abitibi and Weyerhaeuser, continued to log by accessing other roads. So the people of Grassy Narrows used temporary rotating blockades on those other roads as well. By 2008, the community had successfully stopped all outside logging on their territory, and the action had direct economic impact on the logging companies responsible for clear-cutting their land. The newspaper of the nearby mill town, Kenora, the Daily Miner, described the situation in late 2010. Since 2002, the pulp mill at Kenora has died and been demolished. The stud mill has been idled indefinitely, and the Weyerhaeuser plant continues to hang on by its fingernails as it struggles with the collapse of the American housing market, as well as uncertainties with its wood suppliers. The Grassy Narrows blockade, still in place, is now the longest running Indigenous anti-logging blockade in Canada's history. Direct action works. The left can learn a lot from that, but it had better learn fast. Next.
In North America and around the world, more and more people are getting tired of the status quo on the left. Some of these are older people who yearn to recapture the fighting spirit they remember from years past. Some of them are young people already fed up with the obvious failures and timidity of established progressives in the face of global disaster. Some of them are working class people tired of elected officials who promise change you can believe in, only to bow to corporate interests, even as their economic insanity weighs heavier and heavier on the poor. Some are part of a tradition of resistance who have reinvented their struggle in new forms like Black Lives Matter and Idle No More. They all know that time is running out and they are ready to fight. So why do we fight? Why must we fight? We fight because you can't persuade a dictator, a sociopath, or a corporation. Mass exploitation is not a mistake or a misunderstanding, and evil is very profitable. As Frederick Douglass, escaped slave and abolitionist orator, famously said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will." Revolutionary author Gene Sharp understands this. Sharp has written extensively on how nonviolent action works, and his writings have been used in a number of actual revolutions. Sharp's work makes it clear that nonviolent mass movements work by mobilizing political force, not by persuading the exploiters. He warned against the dangers of dialogue with those who would only use negotiations to distract or diffuse resistance. He argued that in order to win, those fighting against authoritarians must create a powerful internal resistance force. Anarchist Michael Albert understands this too. Examining what was lost in leftist culture back in the 1960s, Albert explains, something went wrong with the slogan, "Speak truth to power" to Speak truth to power does not mean try to and convince power by the logic of your truth. It means that it's a slogan. If it means that, it's a slogan we should dump because power doesn't listen to logic. Power doesn't give a damn about truth. The phrase just meant stand up with the truth and assert yourself with it. But somehow it got screwed up into speak truth to power. Spend a lot of time trying to convince power of what the truth is. But that's a total waste of time. Power only responds to raising social costs to force, basically. Next.
Force is not the same thing as violence. There are many different kinds of force. There's economic force. Workers can go on strike, businesses can be boycotted, trade and transport systems can be disrupted, and economic systems rooted in justice can be built. There's political force. Organized voting can be a form of political force, but political force can also include non-cooperation with the establishment and the creation of oppositional political systems, from neighborhood assemblies to revolutionary congresses. There is social force. People can shun those responsible for atrocities, can impose social penalties on those who collaborate, and can organize social movements that value defiance and the upholding of human and ecological rights. And there is the use of physical force. Mass non-cooperation actions where people put their bodies on the line, from lunch counter sit-ins to port blockades, are expressions of physical force. They physically impede bad things from happening. Strategies of physical force differ. They may be explicitly nonviolent. They may encourage self-defense. They may even accept physical counterattacks on those in power. In any case, successful resistance movements have the ability to use physical force. In history, this usually includes the capacity for violence, if only in self-defense. It is especially important for those who embrace nonviolence to understand this point. As Gene Sharp writes, nonviolent action is a means of combat, as is war. It involves the matching of forces and the waging of battle, requires wise strategy and tactics, and demands of its soldiers courage, discipline, and sacrifice. Nonviolent activist Barbara Deming argued, the challenge to those who believe in nonviolent struggle is to learn to be aggressive enough. In any case, when it comes to persuasion, there is little difference between a dictator, a sociopath, and a corporation. Indeed, many thinkers have pointed out that the modern corporation is essentially a sociopath, unmoored as it is from basic empathy and morality. Those in power profit immensely by exploiting the working class and by stripping the earth bare. The only way to stop them from doing this is to make exploitation of people and of the planet more costly than they can afford. This is one of the fundamental insights needed to undertake effective political action. Many resistance movements have spent or wasted decades trying to come to terms with this fact. Next.
William Lloyd Garrison, renowned abolitionist and publisher, abandoned persuasion after many years of fruitless effort, saying in 1840, "There is not any instance recorded, either in sacred or profane history, in which the oppressors and enslavers of mankind, except in individual cases, have been induced by moral suasion to surrender their despotic power and let the oppressed go free, but in nearly every instance, from the time that Pharaoh and his host were drowned in the Red Sea down to the present day, they have persisted in their evil course until some sudden destruction came upon them, or they were compelled to surrender their ill-gotten power in some other manner." On the opposite side, slaveholder James Hammond was equally clear. "If you distilled nectar from your lips and discoursed sweetest music, do you imagine you could prevail on us to give up 1,000 millions of dollars in the value of our slaves and 1,000 millions of dollars more in the depreciation of our land? We fight because we are fighting for survival. The planet is in the midst of an ecological apocalypse. We no longer need to talk about global ecological disasters in the future tense. Ecological collapse is underway, and climate change is our single most urgent global problem. The critical danger is runaway global warming. The greenhouse effect is not linear, and there is not a one-to-one relationship between greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. People tend to think of warming like a thermostat on the wall, turning greenhouse gases up a little bit, and the planet warms a little bit. but it's more like throwing matches onto the living room sofa. Sure, it gets a little warmer at first, but if you don't put out the fire, the whole house will go up in flames. There are planetary tipping points that make global warming accelerate dramatically. As Arctic ice melts, reflective white snow is replaced with the dark water that absorbs more sunlight, and Arctic warming is already melting methane on the ocean floor, releasing huge plumes of greenhouse gases that have been safely contained for eons. International climate accords like those written at Kyoto, Copenhagen, and Paris are woefully inadequate. They would be laughable if the consequences weren't so dire. Not only are they insufficient, they aren't even being followed. We're already well into the worst case scenario of global warming projections from only a few years ago. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has warned that decisive and drastic action must be taken by 2030 in order to avoid catastrophic climate change. But even that stark warning has been called incredibly conservative by groups like the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change, which point out that the IPCC doesn't take into account runaway climate change tipping points. We must all understand that this scenario, or any massive climate change, would roll back all of the social justice gains we've managed over the last few centuries. Next.
Global warming is a great emergency, but ecological injury is ubiquitous. Virtually every biome and ecological indicator is in decline. 90% of big fish have been wiped out in 50 years, with more recent research suggesting it is now past 95%. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, there is 15 times as much plastic as phytoplankton. Soil is being lost 20 times as fast as it can be replenished. Many areas in North America have lost 98% of their original topsoil. More than half of tropical forests have been wiped out. The Amazon rainforest, in particular, has its own tipping points. Because the rainforests are so large as to create their own climates, their continued destruction could cause a permanent drought, which would spread into the northern hemisphere and, quote, massively accelerate global warming with incalculable consequences, a process that might end in the world becoming uninhabitable. There's a dangerous idea in some circles that to care about the planet is a privilege of the middle class, and that the environment is a secondary consideration to basic human rights. But in reality, the two can't be separated. The human burden of ecocide is carried by the poorest, by indigenous people, by refugees displaced by climate-induced wars, and especially by women. There will be no human rights, let alone human life, without a habitable biosphere. If we don't stop this destruction, we will die, but not before human justice does. We fight because industrial capitalism is a dead end. If the ecological situation is so awful, people often ask me, why don't we see it in our daily lives? For those of us living in the wealthy industrialized world, the answer is simple. We're insulated from ecological destruction by a sea of cheap oil. We're not aware of the obliteration of topsoil because fossil fuels allow the production of cheap synthetic fertilizers and pesticides that, along with the depletion of fossil aquifers, temporarily increase global food production. We are not aware of the eradication of ocean fishes because cheap energy allows huge fishing fleets, with the help of satellites and spotting planes, to locate and catch the few remaining school of large fish in the ocean, and so on. We know that nearly everything about our daily material lives depends on cheap petroleum. Producing a calorie of food energy takes about 10 calories of oil. The insulating effects of cheap oil are only temporary. With the most accessible sources of cheap oil already used up, energy corporations have turned to almost inconceivably destructive new methods. Natural gas fracking, the tar sands, mountaintop removal. We've reached the point where maintaining industrial civilization literally means blasting, bulldozing, and grinding the land itself into tiny pieces. These methods may delay industrial collapse, but if not stopped, they will doom us to runaway global warming and unimaginable catastrophe. So I'm just going to finish this little section here, and this will be the end of our reading section, and we'll move on to the discussion section. Industrial civilization cannot last forever. The question is whether anything will be left once it's gone. The sooner collapse happens, the better for the planet and those who will live after. Part of our job as people who care about justice is to try and minimize the strife of that collapse and seg to low energy, sustainable, egalitarian societies. That industrial civilization is a dead end, or that industrial capitalism will collapse, doesn't mean that it will disappear easily. Quite the opposite. Whenever capitalism is on the verge of failure, whenever that Ponzi scheme approaches its limits, the capitalists do whatever they can to prolong it. They will try to shore it up by pillaging the commons that remain, be they physical commons like the ocean or societal commons like social services and healthcare. They will especially attack unions, the poor, and people of color, as they are doing now. They will resort to wars, which are often good for business. They cannot stand back and hope that the hand of history will shuffle capitalism off the stage without fuss or muss. If we want to avoid a gruesome and prolonged slide into fascism or neo-feudalism, we must fight. So that is where we'll end the reading for today. As we move into the discussion section, I wonder if anybody has any thoughts they want to get us started with. Anything that comes to mind immediately?
Well, as someone who's been in this reading group, the first time we read the volume 1, I forgot how the beginning is depressing. So if you're hearing this now, please stay with us, because it's going to get much more empowering after this.
I don't know. I think we wouldn't all be here if we weren't aware of the depressing reality of the situation and interested in sharing in that empowerment. So yeah, here for that. Here for that.
I think the biggest takeaway is just to reiterate the important point that there's no sense in trying to. I can't remember who it was. It was one of the Black Panthers leaders that said that you can't. Maybe it was Kwame Ture who said you can't appeal to the morality of people who don't have morality. Or was it? Yeah, I don't know. That I think a lot of liberals think that if they just kind of explain themselves and explain the reason and say, hey, man, you're like hurting people and stuff. This is like not cool, man. That somehow the exploitative people that have no compassion or empathy for any of those that are impacted by the exploitation, that just doesn't fucking work, and we have to actually take real action that isn't just explaining ourselves or appealing to empathy and compassion.
One thing that really stood out to me is whenever they were talking about the speaking engagement that they had, and kind of the difference in like the bravery of leadership versus the timidity of leadership that we often see in like in the liberal left, that is like indicative of the liberal left. I was expecting it to take like a much more depressing turn whenever they were talking about, all of the organizers that were trying to like feed these, kind of, quieting notions of like, no, we gotta be calm about this. We gotta be polite. Let's use all of these buzzwords that people like. And the speaker did none of that, and everyone was super into it. That was a cool turn.
I think that's a really good point. In my observation, it when you get people that are not when you start talking to people who are more rural and not urban, they very much are into direct action, just kind of naturally. It's just a culture of like, if something needs to happen, you just do it. And instead of like expecting some other entity to do it for you. And so it makes sense that the people that were being impacted by this responded very positively to the suggestion to do something that would actively stop it, and not just like appealing to a middleman, manager, politician, and begging them to do something. Go tell daddy, make it stop. That they wanted to do something real.
I honestly found it really shocking that the author was surprised that the people were so into civil disobedience, because to me it's kind of like a duh kind of thing. Like, those are the people that have the most to lose. Of course they're going to be the people who are most willing to take action. And so like his aha moment was it's just kind of common sense to me. Like, that's just, how I've grown up living in small communities who fight for their own rights.
Yeah, I thought that was one of the more insightful parts, was him talking about how, they were listening to all the speakers, and, they were interested, but they were just super down with the direct action. And, I think there's a general concept among people, or I mean, I should say among organizers, that if you talk to, like, I don't know, you might call it the people, the masses, the average person or whatever, that they're going to be really like, sort of a pacifist and unwilling to take any risks or anything. But one thing that he emphasizes time and time in this book, and I think is really valuable, is that it's actually when people start doing really, really radical things, when they start taking bigger risks, that the average person often gets drawn in. That's when they're like, oh wow, finally something that is going to have an effect is happening. I think a lot of average people recognize that just another march isn't going to do anything. They need some indication that something serious is happening, and that is when they will want to become more involved. And he'll give plenty more examples of that in this book.
Hi, everybody. I found it interesting reading this book because I'm about 5 chapters into volume 1 now myself, that there seems to be a difference to me between motivating people to take action versus like growing people's radical views, right? Like, I think there's a lot of disillusionment in activism, which is really unfortunate. And I think one of the things that Aaron is trying to do in this book is give people a real sense of the history of activism and show the benefits and the accomplishments of activist groups, because the sort of the generic mainstream, the centrist aspect of society, is very good at suppressing the history of activism. And that seems like a big thread of this book to me, is telling people the history to know what you can achieve, what's actually possible.
I think that to kind of spring from that, the notion of like having radical views versus participating in radical direct action. I feel like one of the things that when we think about what a radical view is, there's so much kind of like purity testing on the left. Like you must have this like expansive radical understanding of how the world works, when you don't need all of that to be able to see, okay, yes, there is a need here and someone must step up and do a thing. And just because like the ability to inspire those who don't necessarily have like the whole like, yes, the dissidence versus resistance. I wrote that was like one of the first things that I wrote down. Like that is such a huge point. Like it's the, if you look at for example, like the like the tenets of white supremacy and the scale of like how a white person participates in that system, it's like the difference between like the like from like traderhood to oh gosh, what's the next one? I've lost the word, but I think you know what I'm talking about. That it doesn't require someone to identify as radical for them to understand the need for these radical actions. And I think that that's something that some of the kind of far left can get a little messed up whenever they're in those more like the difference between like a small community, like a rural community, and like a city leftist community. Like it's unrecognizable.
Were there any other specific parts that stood out to people?
I really loved the part at the very beginning when he was talking about the going through the recycling and the spray of diluted high fructose corn syrup like sticky dew. That was the point at which like something about his specific like writing voice really clicked for me. And I really love the way that this text is put together. Thank you so much for sharing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that part definitely hooked me really, really notably. And especially because he mentions that it's not about, morally persuading anyone. It's about power. And this is something that I harp on a lot in my own work. And so I really appreciated that is the way that he sort of centered his analysis, was around an analysis of power. How do we build power in order to be able to fight? How do we recognize the dynamics of other power structures and how to interact with them and so on? And yeah, because you beat me to it. That was actually the part I was going to mention. Is I think that was for me really important. And I also found it very interesting that he brings up that he had this revelation sort of after witnessing what it looked like to really experience environmental devastation on the front lines, and I think this is often what drives people to have this more sort of sober and pragmatic analysis, is often the witnessing of just how devastating the consequences are. Then you start to ask yourself really serious questions like, how do we develop leverage over the enemy structure? Like, how do we force that structure to do what we want it to do? Not by persuasion, but by demonstration of capacity for force, right?
I had a interesting view of the terms liberal and left. as expressed in this book, I actually think there's kind of a boundary between liberals and the left, whereas I think that Aaron kind of reflected more of a view of liberalism as being part of the left, whereas I kind of think differently to that. I think that somebody is a liberal if, when they raise their voice and they're told no, they just accept that. Whereas I think people on the left won't accept no for an answer from a government or a corporation or the police or something like that. They'll keep struggling in some way. And so I think of the differences of different parts of the left as being things like differences in beliefs and differences in tactics.
I feel the same way, that I've always differentiated between the two, but I have read a little bit further into this book, and he does go into a good bit of detail about like how he differentiates and classifies people. But I'm the same way. I always just kind of keep liberals and leftists separate, while he says the liberal left and the radical left.
Yeah, I'm also one of these people who doesn't call liberals leftists. I don't think it's a very good use of the term. But, part of another thing to understand is that, this is less of a theory book and more of an instruction manual. I think, he's probably just trying to communicate well with people for a lot of it.
Yeah, totally. There's also the inconvenient fact that the right-wing party in Australia is called the Liberal Party, because they're referring to sort of economic liberalism in their program, and so that's why we don't really use the term liberal in Australia. We talk about centrists and centre left and things like that.
That makes sense. And I think that with this being an instruction manual, and of course, this is just the introductory part. I haven't read the rest of the book, so y'all have a lot more context for this than I do. But I think it's interesting that, because we understand that, like, when we look at the Overton window and all of that, specifically in America, like as an Americentric perspective, the Liberal Party is super center. Like, there is very little that's far left about the Liberal Party. But I think that it's interesting that he is using the liberal left here as a way to differentiate people of this general philosophy from the rest of the political spectrum. And I think that the way that he's using this in a practical sense allows more space for the quote unquote liberal left to be brought into this way of thinking.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. There's an unfortunate aspect to it, though, with liberals, is that my own personal belief is that almost all liberals are like low-key traitors to the revolution, because almost all people who are liberals will value their own comfort over any kind of social change. I know that's pretty harsh of me to sort of color or describe a bunch of people like that, but that's, I guess, just getting back to my beliefs about the distinction between liberals and leftists. So treat that as opinion only if you want.
I think there's a big difference between people who want stability and peace and people who are willing to do whatever it takes to achieve justice. And I think that liberals very much just want stability and peace, and that's why the liberal politics are so invested in managerial government style. In fact, that no matter how bad no matter how bad things get, they're so terrified of change, because change represents instability, that they would rather just very politely stay in a very bad place in a fascistic society, and even maintaining fascism, if it means stability and an easy life and not having to fight. I've definitely heard many liberals, whenever I make a call to action to them, tell me almost verbatim, that's why I pay taxes, so I don't have to do any of that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I think representative democracy, which is the system that a lot of the West operates under, is both a form of cowardice and a form of laziness. And I think it also ties directly to patriarchy, because people, to use the example here, like liberals, will almost always defer to their government to tell them what to do, whereas it should be the other way around. I guess I can follow on from that by referring to something that Theo said about the belief or the desire for things like stability. And I think that's true, but I think there's another layer underlying the liberal mindset as well, which is respectability politics. And I think the last 6 months have been a real example of how respectability matters more than stability to most liberals, because we've basically had crickets out of the Democratic Party in the US. So that's really, like, to me, explained a lot about the liberal mindset the last 6 months.
Yeah, that's what I meant when I was saying that, when I was talking about their focus on niceness, because being nice and being kind are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And their focus is on being perceived as nice, and, like, yes, that is absolutely respectability politics. I personally, of course, I personally have no use at all for niceness. I prefer kindness and effectiveness, um, and I don't really give a shit if somebody is smiling in my face if they're taking away my rights, and that seems to be like the entire liberal focus. However, the thing that I appreciate about this book is that it is not really just a criticism of, or, like, whining about, the liberals, or whining about the conservatives, or whining about fascisms. It's not really entirely just criticism. I love the fact that this book really lays out tactics and methods, and it gives a full analysis of, I guess, just a view of things to come in this book. It lays out a full analysis of what has worked and what has not worked within various movements, within various groups, and it provides some of the most honest analysis of these groups, including honest analysis of Martin Luther King, of um, gosh, who was the
Gandhi.
Gandhi, and a very honest analysis of Black Panther Party, which, it's the book does says how effective Black Panther Party was, but also isn't afraid to say, like, these were the things that caused them to fall, and so maybe don't do those things in the future. And that's what I really like about this, is that it really balances the criticisms with also like tactics for how to do things better in a way that they won't fail. And I know that's especially true for volume 2, and really excited to get back to that once we finish this.
So
I'm
we have
really
about
excited for that too.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, all I was going to say was we have about 5 minutes left. So, just whatever your thoughts are, if people just want to give us your closing thoughts as we get close to the end here.
I was just going to say, I'm really excited about this because I think one of the things that keeps, like liberals where they're at is the fact that we don't have, like the education about these movements because that's been suppressed information, and because of the hugeness of the machines, because you can't persuade the machines, the hugeness of the machines that we're fighting against, it's very hard for people to think creatively about how these things can look different and how life can be different and how action against something can be different. And so having all of that information like kind of compiled in this one place that has a good balance between like the understanding of dissidence and the importance of resistance, like I'm so excited, y'all.
Well, I'm glad to hear it because it definitely delivers. Anybody else got some ideas or some last thoughts?
I really like the section I'm excited to get back to, because that one just, like, when we read through that section about like kind of like horizontal hostility and what was it, culture of defeat is what it was. I'm really excited to get back to that, because hearing that was like a cold drink of water when I'm parched, and I was like, thank God, finally some real fucking yeah, I'm excited to be reading this again.
Yeah, that section on horizontal hostility and the culture of defeat and culture of resistance, that was all so refreshing to read. It was nice to see somebody say the things that I've witnessed so much in our spaces. So I'm also looking forward to getting back to that. For people that watch the YouTube channel, they've seen a video about that. But I think that, I look forward to bringing that back into the conversation again.
Hey, we should promo my popular education.
Yes, absolutely. So if people want to, every Monday we have an educational event in Cooperation Tulsa. This will be this live stream will be happening every other Monday, but on the alternating Mondays, we have what's called popular education. And that's where Theo chooses a specific like YouTube video or maybe a short essay or something. And they watch that video in the session and then discuss it during the session. So it's so much more, accessible for people. It's really good for people who are just learning these concepts for the first time, but honestly, it's also just really good for anybody. It's just a much more consumable kind of one-off session style. And if you'd like to be involved in that, we usually are going to be advertising it on our social media. Theo, how could they get involved if they want to get involved?
So I manage all of the social media platforms across Twitter, Instagram, and so I promote the popular education group every other Monday. And like you said, it's a kind of like a one and done thing, except for these last two. When we watched the Sandinistas documentary, that was broken up into two because it was a little bit longer than our hour and a half. So if you're following our social media accounts for Cooperation Tulsa, I post the link for our Jitsi chat, and that one's not going to be like posted to YouTube. My little piece of shit laptop doesn't really have the power to do that. But anyone is welcome to join in and watch, and then join in the discussion. Yeah, just follow our social media, or you can DM one of the Cooperation Tulsa pages, and I'll give you the link.
Oh, and just to be clear, that meeting link's different from this one, but like the link stays the same. Like, so for organizer education, it will be the same from fortnight to fortnight.
Yeah, so Daniel
Daniel
has a link. Yes, so Daniel has a link for organizer education, and we use the same one every time. And then I have a separate link for the popular education, and I use that one every time. So the link never changes. It's always the same. Feel free to save it on your browser. That's what I have. I just have it saved on a tab.
Also, as we're drawing to a close, I just want to remind people to click through and follow the Cooperation Tulsa YouTube channel. That was one of the reasons why we did this, was also to kind of get people over there so that they could subscribe, so that we can actually like use that for something, right? So that the YouTube channel is actually like useful to the organization and useful to other people. If you go look in the description, or you might have to refresh your page, I just added it a second ago. There's a link to the Cooperation Tulsa YouTube. Go over there, follow that. And also, if you want to be in the chat where we are having this discussion, where we are doing the readings, go become a recurring donor to our open collective and tell me, and I will get you that link every single week. And I'll actually give you an invite to the Cooperation Tulsa Discord server. And then that way you'll know when all of our events are happening, including all of our educational events. So, and I note that because right now we really need to do fundraising. Cooperation Tulsa really needs to, it needs new recurring donors and new one-time donors. But, becoming a recurring donor is enormously important for Cooperation Tulsa. We're always spending money developing the land out at Flat Rock, and we've seen a big attrition of our recurring donations in the last few months as the economy hasn't been looking so good. So if you want to help Cooperation Tulsa, there are lots of ways for you to help right now and to become engaged in our programs, even if you're not here in Tulsa. So I appreciate everybody watching and tuning in. Once again, this will be happening every other week. So yeah, you'll get lots more opportunities. We're going to continue reading Full Spectrum Resistance Volume 1, then Volume 2. So appreciate everybody. Appreciate everybody coming here to read, and appreciate everybody that showed up for the live stream. But I think that is it for this evening, and I'll talk to y'all later.
All right, good night, y'all.
Take care. Thanks. Bye.